Welcome to Conversations. I am Muqtadar Khan, your host, and I have today with me a very distinguished guest, Ambassador Ausaf Sayeed Sahab, who was a secretary to the Ministry of External Affairs, and more critically, has served as ambassadors to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, two of the countries which are extremely critical to the ongoing conflict and crisis in West Asia. Today I'm going to talk to him about the US-Israeli war on Iran, Iran's retaliation, and the global implications as a result of that on the oil market, and essentially also explore what is happening to the existing global order with regards to West Asia, and what is likely to emerge if and when this war ends. Ambassador Sahab has had two recent articles, which, as you can see, you will see that I will share the links to both the articles in the description of this video. And the one more recent one in Hindustan Times really is a scathing critique of what President Trump is trying to do in the Middle East. And so, without much ado, welcome to Conversations again, Ambassador Sahab.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to join you again.
So I'm going to start by simply asking you, how do you see what is happening in the Middle East? It's quite chaotic and difficult to make sense of. It's like a war of all against war. It reminds me of Thomas Hobbes' scenario of the world. So how do you see what is happening in the region, sir?
You see, it is the Middle East, I think, has entered an era of organized anarchy, I would say, where the old architecture of American primacy, the UN-mediated conflict resolution, rules-based diplomacy has been consciously repudiated by the very powers that had built it in the very first place. So here what I mean to say is that while the peace talks were going on between, indirect peace talks between Iran and US, mediated by Oman, then we had, the combined US-Israeli military action in Iran. So here it gives rise to two things. One, that there is perhaps no belief in the peace process, no belief that talks will lead to peace. So to circumvent any possible thing happening through the peaceful process, there is this strike. Now the strike is also very strange that there were various reasons given by it, and the goalpost kept shifting. The reason given was that there is an imminent threat, to the United States from Iran. But as you would have noticed, observers, geopolitical observers throughout the world do not find much evidence, at least in the public domain, whether any such thing was in the offing. So to me, it appears that it is not a war of the US. It is perhaps US is led into this war, through its most closest ally, which is Israel. So even when we talk about this, even in the Munich Security Conference, recent one, it captured this moment under the theme under destruction. What they meant was that the international order is under destruction. Because in the post-World War architecture, which was there in the security umbrella of US for the entire Middle East and all, that is collapsing under the weight of the great power competition, US and China, another thing. So if you see what has the war achieved in the last 18 days, of course, the top leadership has been eliminated in Iran. But that doesn't mean the regime has changed. In fact, what we have seen is a very sturdy response immediately thereafter, after the leadership has been eliminated. We still see the elimination of leadership. We had Larijani killed last night, and other Minister of I think Defense also eliminated. So all this is happening. So, but the rationale and morale of the war is not understood. And it is perhaps going to like a free for all, So on the one hand, the Trump administration is openly pursuing a sphere of influence logic. That means treating multilateral institutions arenas of hostile lawfare rather than forums of legitimate governance. At the same time, I think it is not just Iran, but it is also the rivalry between economic rivalry between US and China, which is also in the play because everything is revolving around the oil, But the fact that in the retaliation which Iran is doing, striking the civilian and oil infrastructure of the Arab neighbors, that is also sort of one red line which is being crossed as far from the perspective of the Arabs. And then most recently, you saw last night, I guess, Israel for the first time attacked oil infrastructure of Iran, which was a combined gas field called Pars, which is co-owned by Iran and Qatar. So now we really don't know where it is going because it is going out of hand. So, and the most obvious outcome of this will be the energy security will be pushed back of all countries, and we are really attacking the resources which are meant to be for the entire world. So I think it is becoming very chaotic.
You make an interesting observation in your article. You say that Donald Trump is using the peace overtures in the Gaza, Board of Peace initiative to provide cover for this war in against Iran, which is essentially a war that is trying to establish Israeli hegemony in the Middle East. But to that, I also want to add this question based on what you just said. When Israel had attacked Qatar, if you remember, during the negotiations, they had bombed and killed a Hamas negotiator who was negotiating peace with Americans in Qatar. And at that time, the American military base did not do anything to prevent an attack on Qatar by a foreign country. So it's like saying if someone else has attacked, the Americans would have defended Qatar, but if Israel attacks, America will not defend Qatar. That was a message which was very clear, and I don't know whether the Qataris got it or not. But now, if you notice, while Donald Trump is giving lip service to that, our allies are being attacked and we are worried, and these are good guys and innocent people, that's how he's referred to GCC countries under attack from Iran. But Israel is showing absolutely no regard for even its I2U2 or Abraham Accords partner, which is UAE. Do you think that this whole effort to establish Israeli hegemony in the region and the disregard that Israel is showing to the potential partners that it has, like Bahrain and UAE, is that going to change the Gulf countries' posture and relations with Israel going forward?
See, now what is happening is that, you see, first there was an attack on Israel, and then there was the response. Perhaps the response of Iran was not anticipated by Israel or US and also the Gulf countries. See, attacking the Gulf countries, especially the civilian and oil infrastructure, I think is one of the severest escalation I would see in many years, going back to the tanker war and other things. So it had never happened. So this has created a new dimension. So the Gulf countries had all along been trying to persuade President Trump not to kind of wage war and then, use diplomacy to kind of come to an understanding where Iran could be curtailed and its capacity for nuclear escalation is limited, but not a full-fledged war which would push the whole region into instability. That was the stance. But now what has happened is that since Iran has also started striking the Arab countries, there is this dilemma now in Arab countries. First, the trust, there is now a trust deficit also developed. Because if you remember, China had mediated between Saudi Arabia and Iran in March 2023, and that was a rapprochement which was developed, and both sides had exchanged diplomats and diplomatic relations were established. Now, with these kinds of attacks, for whatever the reason, I'm not going into the reason. The reason, of course, Iran gives us that most of the attacks are to the places where they are hosting the hostile bases and other thing.
Yeah.
But in the process, the collateral damage has also been to civilian structure. So I think there would be a trust deficit within that. Now, having said that, now should the Arab countries trust Israel? That is again a big question, because throughout the history there has been nothing which could guarantee that Israel will be at peace. Now, the main cause again when we talk about this is the Palestinian issue, for example. This is the bone of contention. This is the main problem which is there. So when we in the beginning when you asked about the Gaza Board of Peace. So while it appeared that the world is converging, for development of Gaza, I mean, so to say, quote and unquote, development of Gaza, and the term peace was used, then suddenly we had this. So in the current scenario, I would see four distinct actors. One, of course, is the United States, which operates on the logic of coercive dominance. Of course, it backs Israel unconditionally, and it uses economic coercion to enforce compliance of whatever its foreign policy. When we have seen economic coercion, basically, I'm talking about the tariffs and other things like that. Now, the second actor is China. Now, China pursues a policy of strategic patience. I mentioned that it had brokered Saudi-Iran normalization. It has also recently said that it can play a similar role, where other countries are hesitating to do so. Now, why China is more acceptable, power in the Middle East is that because it makes no demands on governance, offers infrastructure, investment, so and so, its policy. Then the third one is Russia. Of course, Russia has been very much weakened by the Ukraine war, and the strategic setbacks it has received in Syria, Iran, but it nevertheless continues to play a stubborn spoilers game. There has been talk that it has provided intelligence support to Iran and all that. So it still has bases in Libya, and it has some military foothold in Sudan. And of course, as OPEC plus, it has some leverage, and now, of course, it has the sanctions have been lifted for export of its oil. So all this is there. So still, significantly diminished, but still playing a role. Now, the fourth important player in this is the middle powers. When we say middle powers, it is, of course, the frontline countries. Some of the frontline countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, India again. Now, so these countries have to treat very cautiously. On the one hand, you have the United States. They have good relations with the United States, so they don't want to do anything which would jeopardize that relationship. But at the same time, they also do not want to be the objects of great power management. So they are again following their own policy of multi-alignment, cultivating strategic, autonomy, leveraging their economic, strengths, and so on and so forth. So this is where I think the order is going, and at the same time, I don't see an end to this war so soon, despite the elimination of top leadership of Iran, because I think one person dies and there is some other is appointed, and the same thing happens. So I think somewhere or the other one should understand that military might in the current times is not the solution for any geopolitical issue. There has to be only talks, and as I understand, there are back channel diplomacy is working with countries like Saudi Arabia, and many other countries are trying to kind of convince United States of finding a via media solution, off-ramp solution, as they would say.
I mean, that's a very interesting argument you're making about the role of external powers. But in a sense, if we go by this argument that this war's goal is to establish Israeli hegemony, and at the end of it, regardless of what happens in the region, no matter how much chaos, Iran is going to be a much weakened country with a lot of its infrastructure demolished and destroyed. Even if there is no regime change, the government will be so weak that it will be more threatening to its own people, there were protests today also in Iran, then it will be in the region. So you have a weaker Iran in the region, and whatever damages and costs that Israel is going to incur, I think American taxpayers are going to pay that bill within a month or so. As soon as the war stops, Trump is going to transfer a few $billions to Israel. So Israel will come out much stronger in that region. So doesn't that actually reduce the influence of countries like China and Russia, because then US, Israel continue to dominate the region, and even regional countries like Egypt, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they may find their influence far more diminished in a system where Israel is so overwhelmingly dominant. I also want to ask you this question, and I'm not very sure whether perhaps in your discussions with some of the senior people in the Gulf, this targeting of leaders in Iran, I mean, just last night, Larijani, who was expected to be the major spokesperson for Iran and maybe the political head going forward, was killed. The Minister of Intelligence was targeted. That has not been confirmed. And the head of Basij, the internal security agency, has also been killed. So Israel's ability to target leadership, does that intimidate the leaders of the Arab world also? I mean, do they also see that, oh my God, if Israel wants to take me out, they can take me out anytime? Does it put the fear of God in people like MBS, MBZ, and others, and they are less likely to be vocally critical of Israel in the region?
Yes, I think this is a new phenomena which we are seeing, globally. That's what I alluded to in the beginning when we are saying that there's a new order where earlier this was not the case. Now we are seeing it more often. We have seen it in Venezuela. Now we are seeing in Iran. If that is the case, then any country which has the military might can decide what kind of regime another country should have, and then that country would have to toe the line and be a kind of a vassal state. So that is very dangerous for a global world order, which has been over the years developed on the principle of rules-based order, mutual respect of countries irrespective of the size or military might. So that kind of a fear will always be there because, see, I mean, frankly speaking, no country in the Middle East region can match the military superiority of Israel. And that superiority backed by United States is obviously undefeatable. Now, whether the objective of Israel and US combined is to only eliminate the possible threat to Israel's existence from Iran is one thing. But other than Iran, I don't think any other country has aspired or talked about, at least as far as I can recollect, about the right to existence of Iran. In fact, of Israel. In fact, most countries talk about, in the context of Palestine and Israel, two-state solution. So this is there. So, and then of course the Abraham Accords, which of course President Trump in his first tenure has initiated, and it led to the normalization of relations with 4 countries, and now a couple of more countries have joined. So that means that the thinking is more to kind of build bridges with Israel, so that doesn't remain a bone of contention for the region, and the region becomes stable. See, most of these countries have invested heavily in diversification of their economies, invested heavily in tourism. So you have Vision 2030 in Saudi, in UAE, and similar counterparts. Things are there in Qatar. So when they have invested so heavily, trillions of dollars are invested in these things, they do not want the regional stability, regional order to be disturbed by these things. So now as I see in this, you also mentioned, perhaps the outcome of this war, whether or not there is regime change will be there, Iran will definitely be significantly weakened. Now, a weak Iran and a very strong Israel, and reassured by its might, and similarly Gulf countries which are more or less caught in their own insecurities. They are trying now to forge a greater interaction and cohesion amongst themselves than perhaps they would have done in the normal courses. So they will deal with Iran. The Gulf countries would deal with Iran in a stronger manner, in a stronger from a stronger position, because Iran is considerably weakened. And from the security perspective, what we once thought that US is actually coming out of the region, not interested to play a greater role in the Middle East about a year ago, and that's what President Trump had also promised under his MAGA thing, that they do not want to have the thing, will willy-nilly start playing a role in the Middle East. So coming back to your point, when US starts playing the role, there will be the other players like China and Russia would face difficulties. From the Gulf countries' perspective, they would always stand to gain if they hedge against a unipolar kind of a situation by opening out to different powers and perhaps developing their own capabilities to defend along with other regional powers, which are the middle powers. So as people see, as many observers see, it is the time for middle powers to come in. United Nations would not continue to have the battle ready positions in the Gulf for a long time. And I think sooner or later it will decide to kind of call off, whether it is by talks or whether it is by the outcome.
Sir, I want to turn a little bit to India, and there's a lot of discussions, obviously, in India going on about India's initial silence in this war, and particularly the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Israel just a few days before the war started, and his statement there that I say with full conviction that I stand with Israel. Was that a signal? Did he? I mean, people here are speculating that he knew that the war was going to start, and he already took sides there by saying I stand with Israel, and then not condemning U.S.-Israel for attacking Iran, which is a violation of international law, violation of UN Charter, and India has aspirations to uphold the UN Charter, become a UN Security Council permanent member. Not only that, but if you look at the statement that Dr. Jaishankar made, he never mentions the US or Israel by name, but does condemn attacks on the Gulf countries. That has been India's position, even though they don't condemn Iran directly, but we know who is attacking the Gulf countries. So there is a perception that India has taken sides in this and has taken a side which is perhaps not morally principled and has not even protected India's interests, given that 85% of all energy, gas, etc., comes from this region. We have 1 crore Indians working in the Gulf. There are so much of investments, and some of the top trading partners of India are UAE and Iraq, and then India's gateway to Central Asia was Iran. Given all these national interests, there is perception that perhaps aligning so closely with Israel, saying that we stand with you with full conviction, has that undermined India's interest in the region? Are countries in the region going to trust India less going forward? Or somehow they are okay with India standing with Israel, not condemning US for its actions, and still maintain good relations with India?
You see, we know India's position is a very foreign policy position, very standard position. India has always maintained a carefully calibrated, multi-aligned posture that prioritizes strategic partnership with Israel on one hand, GCC countries on the other hand, while preserving our pragmatic channels with Iran. This has been there, and all these countries are aware of India's long-standing policy of multi-alignment, rather than exclusively aligning with single bloc. So while, let us say, we were working on the Chabahar project with Iran, we were also simultaneously working on IMEC, in which Saudi Arabia and UAE were partners. Similarly, we were part of I2U2, and at the same time, we were also talking about the two-state solution. So with Israel, we have a relationship which is a strategic partnership. which was primarily, focused on defense, security cooperation, counterterrorism, trade and artificial intelligence. Those were the things. So now, and as you know, diplomatic visits are not planned overnight. They are all planned several months ahead. And so it's just happened that Prime Minister was there, and in a couple of days there was an attack. So I think it's only kind of a bad timing, not on the part of India, but the bad timing on the part of the Israelis, perhaps, to just give the impression to just do this immediately while the big visit was there. So that perhaps led to a wrong perception among people in the Middle East or elsewhere, that there has been a tacit endorsement or prior knowledge. I don't think that is the correct position. But having said that, I want to mention to you that a lot of Arab Street is talking about India growing closer to Israel, but this is not a recent phenomenon. India had always balanced its relationship, as I mentioned. So when the Prime Minister visited for the first time to Israel, he had ensured that the visits, he had visited Iran, he had visited Saudi Arabia and UAE. So I think that was there. Now, having said that, I would say that, personally speaking, I would have expected India as a country which is the voice of the global South, and current chair of the BRICS, and to in the upfront itself, they should have criticized or at least condemned the attack on Iran. That means, as a matter of principle, not going into the details of as a matter of principle, attacking one country by the other, I think, because our Prime Minister has been always talking about that war is not the solution, in the context of Ukraine and Russia and all that. So I think it would have been good if they had condemned that. Now, what had started was this: the MEA's statement, which came on 28th February, was basically kind of a neutral statement, as you mentioned. While expressing regrets at the recent developments in Iran and the Gulf region, they asked for exercising restraint, dialogue, diplomacy, like that kind of thing, without actually implicitly criticizing the violation of Iranian sovereignty. That was perhaps at that point of time, the thought was not to kind of immediately jump and wait and watch kind of a thing. So it took some time, and at the same time, what has started was also our leadership has started talking to all the Gulf countries in the aftermath of the retaliation from Iran. So that again, some quarters said, okay, while at the highest level there were talks to the Gulf countries, but there were no talk to the thing. But all that, I think there was a measurable course correction in the following days. I think after 10 days or so, where you saw that the India's foreign secretary went to the Iranian embassy to sign the condolence book in New Delhi, which was open for late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Then External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar also held multiple engagements with his counterpart, both focusing on practical issues such as the safety of Indians, passage of Indian ships, and there has been a few ships also, containers, which were allowed through the Strait of Hormuz. And then more importantly, the Prime Minister spoke to Iranian Prime Minister Masoud Pezeshkian, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian on 12th. So that again was focusing on some of these things. So I think at the end of the day, there was initial hesitation, I would say, but at the end of the day, we are now talking to both sides. So this is very important. Now,
So there's a difference in how you talk, right? Like, say, for example, calling the leadership in the Gulf countries and expressing sympathy and condemning attacks on them. So when Prime Minister Modi talked about them, he did talk about the condemnation of attacks on the Gulf countries without mentioning Iran, but we know, like, indirect condemnation of Iran. But the overtures towards Iran is more out of dependency. In Urdu we would say ये तो मजबूरी है because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the danger to India. 3 Indian sailors have died, and I think some Indians have also. I think one Indian was hurt or injured in the attacks. About 21 people have died in the Gulf, civilians. So the nature is of outreach to the Gulf countries is supportive, and the nature of outreach to Iran seems to be out of necessity. Uh, uh, do you agree with that assessment of mine?
You see, I mean, honestly speaking, for any country in India's position, it is a tightrope walk. It's a not easy decision. Now, you yourself talked about Indian diaspora in the region. We have 9.5 million diaspora in the region, mostly in the Gulf countries. Now, also our interests include energy security, most of which is coming from the Gulf countries, but of course via the Strait of Hormuz. So on the one hand, we have the major suppliers, which are our GCC partners. On the other hand, in the current scenario, it has to navigate through we need an uninterrupted navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, which is currently being monitored or controlled by Iran. So we cannot, be irresponsible in our statements, which could jeopardize our both interests. So this is definitely a tightrope walk, which is there. Now, having said that, India in the emerging landscape, what we just discussed about the new order, the new regional order, perhaps in the post-war, what would come in, we definitely stand to play a very important balancing role. It could also be India could also utilize its mediation potential. We haven't utilized it. I have always been saying that India should always play a larger role. We are capable of playing that larger role, and perhaps we are hesitating to play. So we could leverage our credibility with all parties, defense ties with Israel, economic partnership with Saudi Arabia and UAE, whatever residual goodwill which we have in Tehran. You see, Tehran, the relationship with Iran is a long-standing relationship. People say that the Ayatollah Khomeini, his great grandfather was of Indian origin, was an Indian. So there is some kind of Indian connection there with Tehran. Large number of our people, also Shias, go for pilgrimage there. Like large number of Sunnis go to the. So we are a country where by its very nature, by its diverse population, even among the Muslims, we have to be very, very, very balanced. So that is there. Then the second thing is that we should prioritize diversification of our imports. Now you see that most countries after this conflict, they are all trying to see how they can prevent something like this from happening. Like countries like Japan, South Korea, India, they're all dependent on oil. So should they depend on oil only coming through the Strait of Hormuz, or should they just think of alternatives? So for example, if you ask me, I would say that we should consider diversification of our oil imports, maybe from countries like US, for example, Russia, as long as it is feasible, Nigeria, West Africa, Latin America, Venezuela, we've been talking to. So all these are options where we could kind of increase non-Hormuz routes thing. At the same time, a lot of countries are also where countries which have a large number of strategic reserves are also focusing on them to expand those strategic reserves. We do have a program of strategic petroleum reserves in which UAE is a very important partner, and even Saudi, has shown interest. When I was there as ambassador, we had started the discussion. So you see, the entire thing in this thing is that energy focus. We don't want the energy, relationships with any of these countries to be, basically put under ransom by any third country. So this is what it is, and also you talked about the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. You would be aware that in February, he wrote a very good article in, I think, Economic Times, if I'm not wrong, where he talked about de-risking in the age of uncertainty. How countries should de-risk. It's not a question of one country siding with the other and all. You have to de-risk whatever are your interests. So it is basically geoeconomic interests. So nowadays, when we talk about the new order, most countries are putting the morality a bit behind and putting the geoeconomics in the forefront. So that is, of course, an unfortunate development, I would say, in a new international emerging order. But this is what is happening. This is what I see.
It is very interesting that you brought up that de-risking argument, and I think that is going to be a big thing that is going forward after the end of this war, that countries are not going to, they are trying to reduce. For example, Japan's dependence is 90% on the Gulf countries. And so in that sense, these oil producing countries in the Gulf may actually suffer the consequence of this long term, that people are going to diversify away from them. Especially benefiting. The US is going to be a big beneficiary of this war in terms of its ability to sell oil and even gas to many other parts of the world. But I do want to ask you this, make this question that while oftentimes the defense of India's foreign policy is made that it's truly realist and it doesn't, but there are rhetorical and moral issues. So, for example, the Prime Minister gained a lot of public, shall we say, goodwill when he went to Moscow and said this is not an era of war. But he has never told Netanyahu or Donald Trump that this is not an era of war. And then he stands in Israel and says, I stand with you, but he does not make similar comments about other countries like Iran. We've never said that we stand with Iran. So there is a clear imbalance in the rhetorical side of it. But this is my last question to you. Donald Trump is beginning to realize that perhaps he is in trouble with regards to the Strait of Hormuz, and there's a technical or strategic error, or they underestimated the Iranian resilience and overestimated American and Israeli firepower, or whatever it is. They are unable to shut down Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. And so Trump has been appealing to different countries and reached out to 7 countries. But he did not reach out to India. He went out to China and then obviously NATO allies. But he did not reach out to India. And given the fact that India said that we stand with Israel, India is part of I2U2, part of the Quad, is that a meaningless oversight, or is that something that India should worry about, that Donald Trump did not seek India's help for the Strait of Hormuz, given the fact that India has now about 26 ships there, India is already negotiating, or they thought that India might not join it, and so they felt that they should not ask India's help?
You see, again, your question, can be answered by the the policy of India, even in terms of policing these troubled waters. Never India, when in terms of anti-piracy operations or escorting our ships, even in turbulent times, India has always hesitated to join any international coalition to do so. We have independently been deploying our naval ships, and these naval ships have been successfully escorting our ships which are trading in this region, our oil tankers, and as we speak also there are Indian naval ships in the region. So even if we have been, if even presuming that if US had asked India, I doubt whether India would have responded to join any international coalition like this, because we prefer to do it on our own, because this is how we maintain our neutrality. But you also saw even the traditional allies of US, they are also hesitating to respond militarily, because I think the problem, the magnitude of the problem is not a simple amassment and accumulation of military power to open up the Strait of Hormuz. I think willy-nilly it will come down to discussions, because even if you militarily open it up, you cannot still prevent Iran from striking from across the Strait of Hormuz. They can do so. So would any country put this to risk? So I think it is. Most of these countries were thinking on these lines, that's why they have not sent it. For India, definitely, we are doing our own in our own way to safeguard our interests, maritime interests. We have a very robust maritime cooperation with different countries in the region. We have forums under which we cooperate with countries in West Asia and North Africa, and we have been known to be carrying out counter piracy measures for a long time. So I think India always prefers to do it on its own strength rather than joining any coalition, especially in a time when it is too tense, the world getting too polarized, the region is getting too polarized. We may not like to add to this chaos by sending our warships.
I think I agree with you. The whole attempt to try and build a coalition was to basically share the risk of dealing with the Strait of Hormuz. Ambassador Saab, thank you very much for joining conversations. I really appreciate your astute analysis. Your experience of the region is also extremely beneficial to our viewers. And I'm also extremely grateful for your time and your thoughtful answers. And I must also say that your contributions in the Indian media, I found both your articles very interesting, and I'm going to share their links in the description of this video. So I invite all the viewers to also read those articles. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much, Khan Saab. Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you very much. Bye.